get our first ambassador, who's been resident in both Tehran and Isfahan, to come and share his perspectives on where we are at the moment. Ambassador Miller.
Sorry.
Time frames. I first went to Iran in 1959. This was after the coup d'etat of 1953 and the beginnings of a argument about who should rule Iran. It was an argument that was central to a generation that was transforming the country economically. This generation received its education in many respects from the best universities in the world, including its own. The oil revenues were beginning to have an effect on constructing an infrastructure for the country. There was a new sense of national identity being formed. Among my friends, the people of my generation in Iran, the arguments were, what kind of model shall we follow when we take over? The Chinese model, the Indian model, the American model, and of course the Tuda spoke about the Soviet model. This is because Iran was in the midst of a continuing revolution, which continues to this day. The political equilibrium of Iran has not yet been reached. However, the revolutionary ideals have been developed over the past 110 years. What are those ideals? And they're important to look at, particularly now, when Iran is on the brink of restoring relations with not only the United States, but Western Europe. It is on the brink of coming out of isolation, an isolation that began with the overthrow of the Shah in 1978 and 9. There is a chance that Iran, like the United States, will cease to be hostages to each other. There is a chance that the high civilization of Iran will have a chance to flourish fully. the expression of aspirations. I can recall meetings, dinners in Iran where poetry would be recited as a normal event. But when I was there, it was political poetry. In 1964, for example, an anthology was published, an anthology of free verse. This was formally a new kind of poetry, that is, the stanza forms and the rhymes of the past were no longer followed, and there are new subjects, and the subjects were about the suffering and difficulties of the people. One evening I recall vividly, there was a recitation of Ferdowsi's Aresh the Archer, Aresh Kamangir. And Siavush Kasrai was a free poet of that time, and he gave a modern version of Aresh Kamangir, and everyone knew the poem and felt it in their hearts. They were looking clearly for a new system of government, a new way of expression, a new dignity, a new national identity. The complication of a society, within a society of so many thousands of years of duration, emerge in times of crisis. Certainly, Iran has been in a crisis mode for my lifetime. In 1953, a democratically elected ruler was overthrown by the United States, the model of the democratic society that Mossadegh sought to develop. The ideal was shattered, and the search for a new ideal had to come from within. And it has come from within. And the result is what we see now, a very complicated society, both secular and religious, a government system which is both secular and religious, highly competent in the world of technology, with great resources. It has every reason to believe that the new national identity will be a model for much of the world and an example of the best in its cultural life and history. When the hostages were taken in 1979, this was the beginning of the common use of words like sanctions, retribution, revenge. The hostage syndrome reflected the reality that both the United States and Iran had become hostage to each other. The word hostage goes back to the 12th century in English. Here, in its original meaning, it meant a pledge, not simply a taking of captives. In fact, hostages could also be friends. We have put ourselves in that condition, and the pledge, in a way, was the national identity of both countries. It certainly was the taking of American diplomats. In return, Iran was placed in a sanctioned mode as an enemy. There is a chance now to break through, to have a settlement. And I believe that the beginnings that were made as early as the first months after the taking of the hostages, the beginnings that were made in the end of the Iran-Iraq War can have fruition now. The agreement that's possible between the United States and Iran first is in the nuclear area. Iran has the capability of building nuclear weapons. There's no question about that. The technology and the brain power is there. The components could be put together should Iran decide to do so rather quickly. However, Iran has decided not to build nuclear weapons. There are no nuclear weapons, and there's a framework for serious discussion now, which is based on the proposition that is reflected in the religious statement made in the fatwa of both Khomeini and Khamenei, that weapons of mass destruction are forbidden by Islam, and Iran will have no nuclear weapons, has no nuclear weapons, and will not disseminate or produce any. We should seize that declaration and make it a reality by active diplomacy. There are a number of diplomats in this room. Johnny Pico was a part of a very successful outcome ending a terrible 10-year war. The capability of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran is unusual. This is a person who knows the nuclear equation perhaps better than anyone else in Iran, and he knows it as well as almost anyone else in the world. Our Secretary of State is well versed in these matters as well. The agreement based on an acceptance of the idea, the framework, that Iran will not be a nuclear weapon state and only use its enriched uranium for peaceful purposes is the basis for an agreement. The IAEA requirements for inspection and monitoring have been worked out over 10 years of experience. What is missing is the will on both sides to begin. The P5+1 has been underway for over 10 years. It has not produced a result. And the reason it hasn't is because they haven't addressed the fundamental issues of what an agreement would constitute. The deal is a very good one. No nuclear weapons, the lifting of sanctions, verifiable inspection, and the resumption of normal, civilized life between our countries. There's no reason why Iranian students shouldn't once again come in the numbers that they came to the United States in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It was the #1 nation. And it produced brilliant results in Iran. And is the basis of what should be a sound relationship between our countries. My very good friend, Bruce Langan, who was chargé in Tehran when the hostages were taken, spoke just a few days ago at a conference on this very subject. And he said, and I think this is a bellwether, let's get on with it. 34 years of being hostage to each other should end. We who were captive and our captors now understand that we should once again become friends. So get on with the negotiations. Work on what can be achieved. Open the gates to exchanges on all levels. Free the diplomats to talk to each other. Allow the diplomats to come to Washington and anywhere else in the United States. Talk to the counterparts throughout the world. Let's get on with it. I think Obama wants to have an agreement. And with the team he has in place now, with Kerry and Hagel, I think he can achieve it, and we will see significant progress this year.